In September of 1839, at a crowded slave auction in Natchez, Mississippi, plantation master Edmund Harlan committed an act so reckless that even seasoned traders fell silent. He purchased the most beautiful enslaved woman anyone there had ever seen, a girl no older than 20, flawless skin, unnaturally calm eyes, for less than half her expected price. No one else bid. Not one. The crowd whispered. The auctioneer avoided eye contact. Two men crossed themselves. The white society of Natchez was scandalized by Edmund's arrogance, but they had no idea why the bidding stopped, or what that silence truly meant. By the following spring, 7 men connected to Harlan Plantation would be dead, 1 insane, and Edmund himself would lock his own bedroom door every night in terror. What really happened to the woman called Eliza May? And why did those who knew the truth refuse to speak, even years later? Before we uncover the disturbing truth, subscribe, hit that bell, and comment your state below. Now let me take you back to where it all began. In September of 1839, on a morning already thick with heat and rot, Edmund Harlan raised his hand at a slave auction in Natchez, Mississippi, and in doing so crossed a line even other masters knew better than to approach. The auction yard sat behind a row of brick warehouses near the river, the ground trampled into a sour mixture of mud, dung, and old blood. Canvas awnings sagged overhead, trapping the heat. Men wiped their necks with handkerchiefs already stained brown. Chains clinked softly. Somewhere a woman cried until a driver struck her silent. The sound barely turned heads. This was ordinary. What was not ordinary stood barefoot on the platform. She was called Eliza May, though no one knew if that was the name she had been born with or one assigned to her by a man who had already forgotten her face. She could not have been more than 20. Her skin held a smooth, even darkness untouched by scars. Her hair was coiled neatly back, not a strand out of place, as though someone had taken great care with her that morning. Her posture was straight. Her hands were folded calmly in front of her. Her eyes did not search the crowd. That was the first thing men noticed. Most slaves watched the bidders with naked fear or desperate calculation. Eliza May looked past them, toward the river, her gaze steady and distant, as if she were waiting for something already promised. A murmur moved through the crowd. Christ above. Too fine for this place. Why bring her here? The auctioneer cleared his throat. He was a thin man with a red face and a voice trained to carry over screaming livestock and human misery alike. Even he hesitated before placing his hand on Eliza May's shoulder. When he did, she did not flinch. Healthy, he announced. Strong. Domestic trained. No defects. That was a lie. Everyone could feel it. Bidding should have begun high. A woman like her, young, beautiful, unmarked, should have sparked competition, greed, crude jokes. Instead, silence spread outward like oil on water. Men glanced at one another. One laughed nervously, then stopped when no one joined him. A planter from Concordia Parish folded his arms and shook his head once. Another spat into the dirt and stepped back. No one bid. The auctioneer tried again, lowering the price. Still nothing. Edmund Harlan felt irritation bloom behind his ribs. He had arrived late, already in a foul mood from the journey, his boots still wet from the ferry crossing. He was used to rooms bending toward his desires. Used to money smoothing resistance. The quiet unsettled him. He studied Eliza May more closely now. The curve of her jaw. The stillness of her breathing. The way her eyes never once flickered toward him. She's wasting the morning, Edmund muttered. A man beside him leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Best leave her. Edmund turned. Why? The man did not answer. He simply stepped away. That should have been enough. It was not. Edmund raised his hand. I'll open. The auctioneer blinked. Relief crossed his face too quickly, then vanished. Sir? I said I'll open. Name your price. A ripple passed through the crowd. A few men stared at Edmund as though he had spoken aloud a private blasphemy. Others looked away entirely. The price was named. Edmund barely listened. He nodded. The hammer did not fall. The auctioneer hesitated again, his fingers tightening around the gavel. He leaned forward. Sir, I should tell you. Tell me nothing, Edmund snapped. Proceed. The gavel struck wood. What? Sold. The sound echoed longer than it should have. A woman gasped. Someone crossed himself. A black driver near the platform closed his eyes. Eliza May turned then, finally, and looked directly at Edmund Harlan. Her gaze was not grateful. Was not afraid. It was assessing. Edmund felt something cold move beneath his skin. He straightened, anger rushing in to smother it. He was not a man accustomed to discomfort, especially not from property. "Chain her," he ordered. The driver approached slowly. His hands trembled as he reached for the irons. When the metal touched Eliza May's wrist, she looked at him, not sharply, not with threat, and he recoiled as if burned. "I'll do it," Edmund barked, stepping forward himself. What he did not know was that this was the first time no one intervened. No warning. No last chance. The chain closed. Eliza May lowered her eyes. The auction resumed around them, the spell broken, voices rising once more, but the space where she had stood seemed colder, emptier. Men avoided Edmund's gaze now. Conversations fell quiet as he passed. As he led her toward his carriage, Edmund felt a peculiar sensation settle over him. Not triumph, but possession tinged with unease, like grasping something that did not belong to him and knowing, somewhere deep inside, that it never would. By the following spring, 7 men connected to Harlan Plantation would be dead. But on that September morning, as the river rolled on behind them and the gavel's echo faded into memory, Edmund Harlan believed he had simply made a bargain no one else was bold enough to claim. Aunt Eliza May walked beside him without resistance, already counting the days. Harlan Plantation announced itself long before it could be seen. The smell came first: wet earth, old leaves, cane smoke, and the faint metallic tang that clung to places where men labored until their bodies learned to obey without thought. Spanish moss hung from the live oaks like funeral shrouds, stirring lazily as Edmund's carriage rolled through the gate. Cicadas screamed from the trees. Somewhere deeper in the fields, a bell rang to mark the end of a day that had never truly begun. Edmund Harlan watched his land unfold with the proprietary calm of a man who believed the world arranged itself around him. He was 42 years old, tall, broad through the shoulders, his hair already thinning at the temples. He dressed carefully even for travel, his coat brushed clean, his boots polished. Control mattered to him. Appearances mattered. He had learned early that cruelty wore best when tailored. The house rose from the ground like a statement rather than a shelter. White columns. Wide verandas. Shuttered windows that stared outward with the blank confidence of wealth. It had been built by Edmund's father and improved by Edmund himself. New wings added, old debts erased, the land expanded acre by acre through marriages, purchases, and quiet ruin of lesser men. He had inherited not just property but certainty. Eliza May stepped down from the carriage without being told. She took in the house, the yard, the distant line of cabins, the fields beyond. Her expression did not change. "Stay close," Edmund said. She did. Inside, the air smelled of lemon oil and dust. The house was too large for one man, and it knew it. Floorboards creaked in places no one walked. Curtains stirred without wind. Edmund had noticed these things more since his wife's death, though he would never have admitted it aloud. Margaret Harlan had been dead for 3 years. Fever took her in the spring, quick and indifferent. She left no children. No warmth lingered in the room she had once occupied. Edmund kept her bedroom locked now, the key heavy in his pocket, a habit he told himself was respect. He summoned the overseer with a bell pull. Thomas Gray arrived moments later, hat already in hand. He was lean, sun-darkened, his eyes sharp with a man's constant calculation. He stopped short when he saw Eliza May. "That the new one?" "Yes." Gray nodded once but did not step closer. "Field?" "No." "House?" Gray hesitated. "Sir." Edmund turned. "You question me?" "No, sir. Just—" Gray swallowed. She was at auction for a reason. Edmund felt his temper stir. "Everything is." Gray looked at Eliza May, then away. "Where would you like her placed?" "In the main house. Kitchen work. Laundry. Upstairs when needed." Gray opened his mouth, then closed it. "As you wish." What he did not say was that the other hands had already noticed her. What he did not say was that word had traveled faster than the carriage wheels. What he did not say was that some things followed people, and plantations were not as isolated as their masters believed. Edmund dismissed him and turned back to Eliza May. "You will be useful here." "Yes, sir." Her voice was soft, steady. He studied her again, irritation resurfacing. There was no pleading in her tone. No tremor. It felt like a challenge, though he could not have explained why. "Do you understand where you are?" "Yes, sir." "This is my house. My land. My rules." "Yes, sir." "Look at me when I speak." She did. Come. Unflinching. For a moment, Edmund felt the strange urge to look away. He crushed it instantly. "You will do as you are told," he said. "There will be no trouble." Eliza May inclined her head. "There is always trouble, sir." The words slipped out before either of them could stop them. Silence followed. Edmund's face hardened. "You would do well to remember your place." She lowered her eyes. I know my place. He left her then, anger prickling along his spine, telling himself the exchange meant nothing. Slaves said foolish things. He had heard worse. Outside, the sun dipped low, throwing long shadows across the yard. From the cabins, enslaved men and women watched the main house with quiet intensity. No one smiled. No one whispered jokes. An old woman pressed her palms together and murmured a prayer not meant for white ears. By nightfall, as lamps were lit and the house settled into its uneasy stillness, Edmund Harlan would realize that the plantation no longer felt entirely his. Anne Eliza May, assigned a small room near the back stairs, lay awake listening to the house breathe, already familiar with the sound. It was not the first place that had welcomed her this way. It would not be the last. No one at Harlan Plantation asked where Eliza May had come from. They asked how quickly she worked, how quietly she moved, how little space she seemed to occupy even when standing in the middle of a room. They noticed that she learned the house in days. The loose stair, the window that never latched, the cupboard that stuck in damp weather. They noticed she never startled when spoken to from behind. They noticed she slept lightly, if at all. But her past remained untouched, like a wound no one dared probe. What Edmund Harlan did not know, what he never thought to ask, was that Eliza May had already lived on 4 plantations before his. The first had been in eastern Louisiana, a sugar place where the air stayed wet and the overseer drank himself into rages. Eliza had been 13 then, small, watchful, newly separated from her mother. Within a year, the overseer was dead, crushed beneath a wagon wheel on a road he had traveled every day of his adult life. People whispered. Accidents happened. Eliza was sold cheaply to settle a debt. The second plantation lay farther north, cotton country. The master there took a particular interest in her, one that made the other women avert their eyes when he passed. His wife fell ill that winter. He followed soon after, coughing blood into handkerchiefs that never stayed clean. The doctor blamed consumption. The wife blamed God. Eliza was sold again before spring. By the third, word had begun to trail her like smoke. Nothing concrete. Nothing that could be named without sounding foolish. Just a sense. A reluctance. A feeling men could not justify but obeyed anyway. When a barn burned in the night and 2 men did not escape, the plantation changed hands entirely. Eliza left with the inventory, her name written smaller each time. She arrived at the 4th plantation already knowing what silence was worth. She had learned when to speak and when not to. Learned how to make herself useful without drawing desire. Learned how to listen through walls. Learned how fear moved through men long before it showed on their faces. She had also learned something else, something she never named even to herself. That suffering accumulated. That it soaked into people, into places, into the very air. That it could be carried. That some were forced to carry more than others. At Harlan Plantation, she worked the kitchen first. The cook, a heavy-set woman with scarred hands, watched her closely. You don't look like trouble, the woman said one night as they scrubbed pots side by side. Eliza did not look up. Looks don't help. The cook exhaled through her nose. Where you from? Here, Eliza said. The answer ended the conversation. Edmund observed her from a distance at first. He liked order and she brought a strange version of it with her. Meals arrived on time. The house stayed cleaner. Noise diminished. It unsettled him, though he would have sworn the opposite. At night, he began dreaming again. Margaret stood at the foot of his bed, her face half in shadow. Sometimes she said nothing. Sometimes she asked questions he could not answer. Once she stood aside and another woman stepped forward, her features indistinct, her eyes too calm. Edmund woke sweating, his heart racing, the sheets twisted around his legs like restraints. He told himself it was guilt, loneliness. Downstairs, Eliza lay on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling as the house whispered. Footsteps moved overhead. A door opened that should have remained locked. She felt the shift when the air changed, when the house remembered something it had tried to forget. In the cabins, the others noticed things too. A mule refused to enter the yard when Eliza crossed it. Dogs slunk away from her path. An old man dropped his tools when she passed and would not pick them up until she was gone. Old Ruth watched her from a distance, eyes sharp and a face creased by decades of endurance. She said nothing at first. She waited. The first time Edmund truly lost his temper after Eliza's arrival, it surprised even him. A ledger entry did not balance. A shipment was late. A man answered him too slowly. Edmund struck the man without thinking. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Eliza was in the doorway, unseen. She felt the moment lodge itself into the walls. That night, she dreamed of her mother's voice, distant but clear. Not yet. The following morning, Edmund noticed a headache that would not lift. His coffee tasted wrong. The mirror showed him a face slightly unfamiliar, as though something had shifted while he slept. He told himself nothing had changed. None of them knew, not Edmund, not the overseer, not the frightened hands in the fields, that the pattern had already resumed. And patterns, once begun, did not stop on their own. The first night Eliza May slept beneath Harlan's roof, rain came without warning. It began as a soft tapping against the windows, then thickened into a steady drumming that wrapped the house in sound. Edmund lay awake listening to it, counting the seconds between thunder, telling himself he had always slept poorly during storms. The house shifted around him, beams contracting, floors sighing under the change in air. Somewhere, a shutter rattled, though he was certain it had been secured. He rose and lit a lamp. The flame steadied slowly as if reluctant to commit. Edmund carried it down the hall, past the locked door of Margaret's room. He paused there longer than he intended, his hand brushing the key in his pocket. For a moment, just a moment, he thought he heard movement inside. Fabric. Breath. He moved on. Downstairs, the house smelled faintly of damp wood and something older, something that reminded him of closed rooms and long-neglected trunks. He reached the back stairs and stopped. Eliza May stood at the bottom, barefoot, a folded sheet draped over her arm. "I heard the rain," she said. Her voice did not carry apology. "What are you doing awake? You rang for water." Edmund frowned. He had not. "I did not," he said. She inclined her head slightly. "Then I was mistaken." She did not move. Neither did he. The lamp flame guttered between them. Edmund became suddenly aware of how quiet the house had grown beneath the rain, as though it were listening. "Go back to your room," he said. "Yes, sir." She turned and ascended the stairs without sound. Edmund watched until she disappeared, a tension lingering in his chest he could not place. He told himself it was irritation. It was always irritation. But sleep did not come easily after that. Over the next nights, small things began to go wrong. A door Edmund knew he had locked stood open in the morning. A mirror in the downstairs washroom cracked clean through its center, splitting his reflection in two. Once, as he dressed, he could have sworn fingers brushed his sleeve, light, curious, though no one stood behind him. Eliza May worked without complaint. She moved through the house like a shadow cast at the wrong angle, present without intrusion. She did not speak unless spoken to. She did not linger. And yet, Edmund found himself noticing when she was not there. He noticed the way the dogs whined when she passed the yard. The way horses rolled their eyes and sidestepped her path. He noticed that Thomas Gray no longer entered the house unless necessary. "You're letting the place get to you," Gray said one morning, standing just inside the doorway, hat clutched in his hands. "Storms do that." "Storms do not unlock doors," Edmund replied. Gray shifted his weight. "Houses settle. Houses do not remember." The words surprised Edmund as soon as they left his mouth. Gray stared at him, searching for humor that never came. "If there's something you wish to say," Edmund added, "say it." Gray hesitated. "There are stories, sir." Edmund's mouth tightened. "I do not pay you to repeat stories." Gray nodded. "No, sir." He left quickly. That night, Edmund dreamed of the auction again. The platform. The heat. The silence when no one bid. But this time, when the hammer fell, it struck his own hand. He woke with a shout, his heart hammering, his palms stinging as though struck in truth. Down the hall, a door creaked open. Eliza May sat upright in her narrow bed, her breath steady, her eyes already open. She had learned long ago to wake before sound fully arrived. She listened as footsteps crossed the upper floor, slow, deliberate, heavier than hers. They stopped outside Edmund's room. Pause. Then retreat. In the cabins, old Ruth stirred from her pallet and pressed her forehead to the dirt floor. She whispered words taught to her by a woman whose name history never recorded. Words meant to keep harm contained. Words that had never truly worked. The following evening, Edmund found Eliza in the kitchen after dark, standing before the cold hearth. "Why are you here?" he demanded. She turned. "The house does not like being empty at night." The answer struck him harder than any insolence. "You will not speak to me that way." I spoke plain. "You speak when spoken to." "Yes, sir." She lowered her eyes, but Edmund could feel the house close around them, the walls drawing in as though the space itself were curious how far this exchange would go. He left abruptly, unsettled by the sense that he had stepped into a conversation already in progress, one that did not require his consent. By the end of the week, Edmund began locking his bedroom door. He told himself it was prudence. He did not yet understand that the plantation had begun to change its allegiance. Aunt Eliza May, lying awake in the dark, listening to the house settle into a new pattern, knew the nights were only beginning. It was old Ruth who finally spoke to her. She waited until the afternoon heat had driven most people indoors, until the yard lay empty except for the cicadas and the slow creak of a pump handle. Eliza May stood at the wash line wringing out sheets, her arms steady, her movements measured. Old Ruth approached without sound, her shadow arriving before she did. "You don't eat from every hand," old Ruth said. Eliza did not turn. "I know. You don't sleep deep." "I don't." "You don't answer kindness too quickly." Eliza paused then, the wet linen twisting between her fingers. "Kindness costs." Old Ruth nodded once. Her eyes, clouded with age, sharpened. "They always think they're the last ones." Eliza met her gaze. "The last what?" "The last master," old Ruth said. "The last house. The last time." The words settled between them, heavy and familiar. Old Ruth spat into the dirt as if to ward something off. "They buy you thinking you're different. Thinking they're different." "And they're not," Eliza said. Old Ruth's mouth twitched. "No." They stood in silence, listening to the plantation breathe. Somewhere in the distance, a man shouted. A whip cracked. Life continued along its brutal lines. That night, Edmund Harlan sat alone in his study, ledgers spread before him. Numbers blurred. He had always taken pride in his accounts, the neat columns, the precision. Now he found entries he did not remember writing. Ink darker in places. Margins crowded with notes that felt foreign to his own hand. He pressed his fingers to his temple. The headache pulsed again, steady and insistent. "You are tired," he told himself aloud. The sound of his own voice startled him. A floorboard creaked outside the door. Edmund looked up sharply. "Who is there?" Silence answered. He rose, opened the door, found the hallway empty. Lamps flickered. Shadows stretched along the walls, longer than they should have been. From the kitchen below, he heard the soft clatter of dishes. He descended slowly, each step an act of will. Eliza stood at the table, arranging plates with care. "You work late," he said. "The work waits," she replied. "It waits because I allow it to wait." "Yes, sir." He circled her, studying the set of her shoulders, the calm of her breathing. He felt an urge rise in him, not desire exactly but something adjacent, something that demanded recognition. "You have been on other plantations," he said. "Yes, sir." "How many?" She considered. "Enough." His jaw tightened. "Why were you sold?" Silence lengthened. The house seemed to lean closer. "People grow tired," Eliza said finally. "That is not an answer. It is the only one that stays true." Edmund slammed his hand on the table. The plates rattled. Eliza did not flinch. "You will answer me plainly," he said. "I am not a man accustomed to riddles." She looked at him then, really looked, and something passed through her eyes that made his breath hitch. Not threat, not fear, but understanding. "They grew tired of what followed," she said. "What followed what?" "Me." The word hung in the air. Edmund laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You expect me to believe." A scream cut through the night. It came from the far end of the yard, raw and brief, followed by a thud that carried even through the closed walls. Edmund froze. Eliza's head tilted, listening. Another shout. Then nothing. Edmund moved first, grabbing a lantern, striding into the yard with anger burning away his unease. Men were already running. Someone shouted for Thomas Gray. They found Jacob, a field hand known for his temper, lying near the tool shed, his neck bent at an angle no body chose willingly. The dirt beneath him was dark, already soaking. "He fell," someone said quickly. No one believed it. Edmund stared at the body, the lantern light trembling in his grip. He felt a strange detachment as though he were watching the scene through glass. He searched faces for explanation, for reassurance. Found none. From the edge of the crowd, Eliza May watched, her expression unreadable. "What were you doing out here?" Edmund demanded, rounding on her. "I heard the noise," she said. "You were not sent for." "No, sir." Thomas Gray arrived, breathless, eyes darting. He took in the scene, then Eliza, then Edmund. "Accident?" Gray said. "Has to be." Edmund nodded stiffly. "Yes, an accident." But that night, as the body was carried away and the yard returned to uneasy quiet, Edmund felt something settle deep within him. Not grief, not guilt, but recognition. He locked his door tighter than before. In her small room, Eliza lay awake, staring into the dark, Jacob's screams still echoing in her ears. She pressed her palm to the wall, feeling the house's slow, patient pulse. Old Ruth's words returned to her. They always think they're the last ones. Eliza closed her eyes. The pattern had taken its first clear shape, and it would not stop now. By morning, Harlan Plantation behaved as if Jacob's broken body had never cooled on the ground. A bell rang. Field hands filed out in lines, faces blank, eyes fixed forward. The cook stirred a pot that smelled of cornmeal and resignation. Thomas Gray rode the perimeter with 2 patrollers, scanning the tree line as though danger came from outside rather than within. Even the dogs, usually eager for movement, stayed tucked under porches, whining softly. Edmund Harlan woke with his jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached. He dressed in silence, then stood before the mirror and stared at himself longer than vanity required. His face looked the same, broad brow, hard mouth, eyes that had always been steady, but something in the arrangement felt subtly wrong, like a painting hung a fraction off level. He descended to the dining room and found the table set perfectly, coffee already poured. Eliza May stood near the sideboard, hands folded. "You were awake before the bell?" Edmund said, watching her. "Yes, sir." "You heard nothing else in the night?" Eliza's gaze did not waver. "Only what a night always carries." Edmund felt heat flare in his chest. "Do not speak in riddles." "It is not a riddle," she said quietly. "It is a warning." He should have slapped her. He should have reminded her, with a single violent gesture, of the distance between them. That was what men like Edmund did when their authority felt threatened. Instead, he did nothing. The restraint unsettled him more than any defiance could have. He left the room, boots striking the floor harder than necessary, and stepped into the yard where sunlight had already begun to steam the damp ground. Men avoided his eyes. Women kept their heads down. It was not respect he saw in their posture. It was something older. Thomas Gray approached, hat in hand. "Sir," Gray began. Edmund cut him off. Jacob was drunk. Gray's throat worked. He was not known for drink. Then he was careless. Gray nodded, but his eyes flicked past Edmund's shoulder, toward the main house, toward the shadowed windows. "We should send word to the county." "For what?" Edmund snapped. "To have some sheriff come sniffing around my property?" "No. We bury him and move on." "Yes, sir." Gray hesitated, then leaned closer. "The hands are talking." Edmund's mouth tightened. "Then remind them what happens when they talk." Gray's face hardened briefly, an expression Edmund misread as agreement. "Yes, sir." What Edmund did not know was that Thomas Gray's fear did not belong to the enslaved people. It belonged to the house, to the land, to the strange calm that had settled over Eliza May like a veil. That afternoon, Edmund rode out to inspect the fields. Cotton rows stretched like pale ribs under the sun. The river in the distance rolled slow and brown, carrying secrets without complaint. Men worked with mechanical precision. No one met his gaze. At the far edge of the property, near the line where the trees thickened and the air turned cooler, Edmund saw Gray speaking to a young driver named Caleb. Their heads were close, their voices too low to catch. Edmund reined in sharply. "What is this?" Gray stepped back at once. Caleb stiffened. "Just instructing him," Gray said quickly. "About patrol routes." Edmund's eyes narrowed. "You will not whisper on my land." Gray swallowed. "No, sir." Edmund stared at both men, feeling again that creeping sensation of being watched. Not by them, but by something patient and unseen. The wind shifted. Leaves rustled. A crow called once, harsh, then fell silent as if corrected. He rode back toward the house with irritation gnawing at him, and yet beneath it ran something colder. An old instinct he had not felt since childhood, when his father's voice could still make him flinch. That evening, a preacher arrived at the gate. Reverend Amos Pike was a thin man with pale eyes and a face carved into permanent disapproval. He had baptized Edmund's father. He had married Edmund and Margaret under the same live oaks where slaves now hung lanterns for parties they were never invited to attend. Edmund met him on the veranda. "Reverend, what brings you unannounced?" The preacher's gaze slid past Edmund into the dim interior. "Word travels." "Word of what?" "Jacob," Reverend Pike said. "And the girl." Edmund's spine stiffened. "She is mine." The preacher's mouth tightened. "Men have said that before." Edmund's temper flared. "Are you here to accuse me of superstition?" "I am here," Pike said, voice low, "to tell you I will not set foot in that house." For a moment Edmund thought he had misheard. "You will not." "No," Pike repeated. "Not for prayer. Not for blessing. Not for your comfort." Rain clouds gathered far off, bruising the horizon. The air thickened again, heavy with the promise of another storm. Edmund stepped closer, anger sharpening his words. You stand on my porch and refuse me. Pike did not back away. I refuse what is not yours to command. A silence settled between them. Edmund felt the hair on his arms rise, as though the very air had turned electrically charged. From inside the doorway, Eliza May appeared without sound. She stood just behind Edmund, half in shadow, her face calm, her eyes fixed on the preacher. Reverend Pike's gaze locked onto her and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or fear dressed as certainty. He swallowed. You should not have brought her here, he said. Eliza May spoke softly, almost gently. Men always bring what they think they can hold. Pike's lips parted. No words came. He stepped back off the porch as if the boards beneath his feet had grown hot. Edmund turned on Eliza. Inside. She obeyed, but not hurriedly. Not submissively. Simply, as though she had decided the conversation was finished. The preacher mounted his horse, his movements stiff. Edmund, he said once more, voice strained. If you have sense left, you will let her go. Edmund's laugh came sharp. And invite laughter from every man in Natchez? I bought her at auction. Pike's eyes were pale as river stones. Then you bought trouble cheaper than you deserved. He rode away without another word. That night, Edmund drank alone in his study. The whiskey burned but did not warm him. Shadows moved strangely along the walls. The house creaked in slow, deliberate sounds, like a body turning in sleep. Near midnight he heard it again. Footsteps above. Not the light, careful steps of a servant. Heavier. Measured. As if someone walked with purpose. Edmund grabbed his pistol and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The footsteps continued. From inside Margaret's locked room. Edmund froze, his breath catching in his throat. The key in his pocket felt suddenly heavier, as if it had absorbed every year of silence since her death. Behind him, from the dark of the stairwell, Eliza May's voice came soft as a confession. She does not like you keeping her shut away. Edmund turned so fast the pistol nearly slipped from his hand. What did you say? Eliza stepped into the lamplight, her face unreadable. Some doors do not stay locked, sir. Not forever. He stared at her, pulse pounding. My wife is dead. Eliza held his gaze steadily. So are a lot of people. Then she walked past him and down the stairs, leaving Edmund alone in the hallway, the locked door at his side, the sound of unseen footsteps fading into a silence that felt like waiting. By morning, Edmund would swear he had heard a woman laughing inside that room. And by the end of the week, another man would die, this time in a way no one could call an accident, no matter how badly they wanted to. The second death came 3 days later, and this time it announced itself. Caleb was found near the riverbank just after dawn, his body half submerged in the slow brown water, one arm twisted back at an angle that suggested panic rather than accident. His eyes were open. His mouth was filled with mud and reeds, as though the river itself had tried to silence him. Men gathered in a tight circle, hats removed not out of respect but unease. No one spoke at first. The river flowed on, indifferent. Thomas Gray knelt beside the body, his face drawn tight. He touched Caleb's neck, then withdrew his hand quickly as if the skin burned. He slipped, someone offered weakly. No, another murmured. He knew that bank. We all do. Edmund arrived moments later, coat thrown hastily over his shoulders, pistol heavy at his side. One look was enough. The lie would not hold this time. He was young, Gray said. Strong swimmer. Edmund stared down at the body, his jaw working. He felt a strange doubling inside himself. One part furious at the disruption, another part quietly terrified by how inevitable it all felt. Send for the sheriff, Gray said carefully. Edmund rounded on him. And tell him what? That my land kills men now. Gray did not flinch. Tell him the truth. Edmund laughed, sharp and brittle. You would not know the truth if it stood in front of you. Gray's eyes flicked, involuntarily, toward the plantation house rising pale against the trees. Edmund followed the look. Eliza May stood on the veranda. She had not been summoned. No one ever summoned her anymore. She simply appeared when things broke. Her hands were folded. Her face was calm. Her eyes rested on the river with something like familiarity. Edmund felt a surge of anger strong enough to steady him. He strode toward her, boots cutting through the wet grass. You, he said, stopping just short of the steps. You will come inside. Now. Yes, sir. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She walked past him as if the path had already been cleared. Inside the house, the air felt cooler, heavier. Edmund led her into the study and closed the door hard enough to rattle the shelves. "People are dying," he said. "Yes, sir." "You have been near both times." "Yes, sir." "Do not answer me like a child," he snapped. "Do you think I am blind?" Eliza looked at the floor briefly, then back up. "No." "Then speak." She considered him for a long moment. In that pause, Edmund felt something slip. Not authority, not exactly, but certainty. The belief that answers would arrive in the shape he expected. "They were already falling," Eliza said at last. "I just did not step aside." Edmund stared. "You expect me to accept that?" "You already have." He moved toward her, crowding the space. "You are a slave." "Yes." "You are property." Her eyes did not leave his. "That is what you paid for." The word struck him harder than any insult. He raised his hand, then stopped. Something in her stillness unsettled him. Not defiance, but acceptance, as if she had already weighed the blow and found it insufficient. Outside the door, the house creaked. A soft sound like fabric brushing would drifted down the hallway. Edmund lowered his hand slowly. "What are you?" Eliza breathed out through her nose, almost a sigh. "I am what happens when men mistake silence for absence." The sound in the hall stopped. Edmund stepped back, his pulse hammering. "You will leave this place." Eliza shook her head once. "You will try." That night, Edmund sent word to Natchez. Quiet word. Discreet word. He offered generous terms to any man willing to take Eliza May off his hands. No one accepted. One letter came back unopened. Another returned with no explanation. A third bore a single line written in an unfamiliar hand. "Some burdens cannot be transferred." Edmund tore the paper in half, then in quarters, then dropped the pieces into the fire. He watched until they were ash. Outside, the enslaved people did not sleep. Whispers moved between cabins. Old Ruth burned herbs at her door, her lips moving in steady prayer. Thomas Gray packed his things. When Edmund confronted him, Gray did not deny it. "I will take my chances elsewhere," Gray said, voice tight. "This place has turned." "You would abandon me," Edmund said incredulously. Gray met his gaze for the first time in days. "I would survive you." Edmund felt something cold settle behind his eyes. "If you leave, you will not speak of what you have seen." Gray nodded. "I would not know how." He rode out before dawn. By noon, a storm gathered again, clouds rolling in thick and low, pressing the air flat. Edmund stood at the window watching the fields darken, the trees bow under rising wind. Behind him, Eliza May stood in the doorway, silent. "You should have listened," she said. Edmund did not turn. To whom? To everyone who said nothing. Thunder cracked overhead, close enough to rattle glass. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, erasing the yard, the river, the distant cabins until the world seemed reduced to the house and those trapped within it. By nightfall, Edmund would make a final, desperate decision. One that would convince him he could still control the ending. He was wrong. And Eliza May, listening to the storm reclaim the land, knew the plantation had reached the point where questions no longer mattered. The storm did not pass by morning. It lingered over Harlan Plantation like a deliberate presence, rain falling in steady curtains that turned the yard into a shallow mirror of gray sky. Edmund woke to the sound of water dripping somewhere inside the house, slow and rhythmic, like a clock counting toward something he could not see. He dressed with unusual care, buttoning his shirt twice, readying his cravat until it sat just right. Control was a habit. He clung to it. When he opened his bedroom door, the hallway greeted him with a draft that smelled faintly of wet earth and old wood, though no windows stood open. The locked door to Margaret's room was ajar. Only a hand's width. Enough. Edmund stopped breathing. He knew, with the cold certainty of instinct, that he had not unlocked it. He knew the key had remained in his pocket all night, heavy as guilt. And yet the door stood open, inviting and accusing all at once. "Margaret," he said before he could stop himself. The name felt wrong in his mouth, like a prayer spoken too late. He stepped closer. The room beyond lay dim, curtains drawn. The air inside was cooler, undisturbed. Everything looked exactly as he had left it years ago. The bed neatly made, the vanity untouched, the chair by the window still angled as if someone had just risen from it. And yet the impression of presence was overwhelming. Edmund's skin prickled. He felt watched, not from the shadows, but from the familiar shapes of furniture, from the walls themselves, as though the room had learned to see. He backed away and closed the door with more force than necessary. The latch clicked. The sound did nothing to ease him. Downstairs, Eliza May stood in the kitchen, hands submerged in a basin of water that had gone cloudy with use. She looked up as Edmund entered, her gaze flicking briefly to his face, then to the staircase behind him. "You opened it," she said. "I did not." She nodded slowly as though this answer fit a pattern she had already mapped. "Then it opened for you." Edmund slammed his fist against the doorframe. "You will stop this." Eliza withdrew her hands from the water and dried them carefully on a cloth. "Stop what?" "This performance," he said. "These tricks. You think fear gives you power." She met his gaze evenly. "Fear reveals power. It does not create it." Edmund laughed, the sound harsh and brittle. "You speak as if you are not afraid." Eliza considered. "I am afraid of many things. You are not one of them." The admission struck him like a blow. His face flushed. "You will leave this house." She shook her head. The house would not allow it. The words hung between them, absurd and undeniable all at once. That afternoon, the plantation descended into a strange paralysis. Work slowed despite Edmund's orders. Tools went missing. Animals refused to move. One horse broke free and bolted into the trees, screaming like a wounded thing until the sound cut off abruptly, leaving only rain and silence. From the cabins, low prayers rose and fell. Not hymns Edmund recognized. Older words. Older rhythms. Old Ruth sat on her doorstep, rocking slowly, her eyes fixed on the main house. When Edmund passed, she did not lower her gaze. "You should not have locked the dead away," she said. Edmund stopped. "You forget yourself." Old Ruth smiled faintly. "No, sir. I remember." He raised his hand to strike her, then froze. The air around them felt charged, as though the smallest motion might trigger something irreversible. Old Ruth's smile never wavered. Edmund turned away, shaken. As night fell, the house grew restless. Doors opened and closed without touch. Footsteps echoed on the stairs long after everyone had retired. Once, from his study, Edmund heard laughter, soft, unmistakably female, drifting from the upper floor. He threw the door open, pistol raised. The hallway was empty. The laughter faded, replaced by the slow, patient creak of settling wood. Edmund locked himself into his study and drank until his hands steadied. He spread letters across the desk, old correspondence, deeds, ledgers, searching for something solid, something real. The words swam before his eyes. He did not hear Eliza enter. "You should sleep," she said. He whirled, pistol aimed at her chest. "Get out." She did not move. "You are making it worse." "Everything was fine before you," he snarled. Eliza's gaze softened, not with pity but with something like regret. "Everything was already broken. I just arrived when the cracks were ready." A thud sounded above them. Then another. Heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing the upper floor. Edmund's grip tightened on the pistol. "If this is some game." "It is not a game," Eliza said. "It is a reckoning." The footsteps stopped directly above the study. Something scraped across the ceiling like furniture being dragged. Edmund backed toward the wall, his breath coming fast. "Who is up there?" Eliza's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Everyone you locked away." The ceiling groaned. Dust sifted down, catching in the lamplight like ash. Edmund fired. The shot shattered a mirror, the bullet ricocheting wildly before burying itself in a bookcase. The sound echoed through the house, followed by a silence so deep it felt oppressive. Then the footsteps resumed, closer now, descending. From the stairwell came the unmistakable sound of a door unlocking. Edmund realized then that the house no longer answered to him. And Eliza May, standing calmly amid the chaos, knew the final act had begun. By morning, the storm had broken the river from its banks. Water crept into the lower fields, swallowing fence posts and turning the cotton rows into pale ghosts beneath the surface. The sky cleared just enough to let sunlight fall on the damage, harsh and revealing. Edmund Harlan stood on the veranda watching the land drown and felt, with a clarity that frightened him, that the plantation was answering a question he had never meant to ask. He had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the footsteps again. Every time he woke, the house felt closer, tighter, as if walls could lean. He made his decision before breakfast. "Bring a wagon," he ordered. "Harness the gray mare." Thomas Gray was gone, and so the command fell to a driver who could not hide his fear. "Sir?" "I am taking her back to Natchez." The word back tasted bitter. Edmund clenched his jaw. "Today?" Word spread faster than his orders. By the time Eliza May appeared in the yard, a small knot of people had gathered at a distance, pretending to work while watching everything. "You are leaving," Edmund said flatly. Eliza looked past him, toward the flooded fields, toward the trees bowed under the weight of water. "No. You will, he said. I will sell you. Or give you away if I must. She turned her gaze back to him, calm as ever. You will try. The wagon rolled through the gate by mid-morning. Edmund rode with her himself, pistol resting openly on his thigh. The road to Natchez was slick with mud, the trees dripping, the air heavy with the scent of rot and renewal. He did not speak. Neither did she. At the edge of town, the first man refused to meet his eyes. The second listened in silence, then shook his head. She's trouble, he said. I won't touch her. Edmund's temper flared. You have not even seen her work. I have heard enough. A third man laughed nervously. You should have listened at the auction. By noon, Edmund's pride had curdled into desperation. He lowered the price, then lowered it again. One man agreed to meet him behind a warehouse, away from witnesses. He was broad-shouldered, confident, his voice thick with bravado. I'll take her, he said, looking Eliza up and down. But she answers to me now. He reached for her arm. The sound that followed was not loud. It was final. The man's scream cut off as his body hit the ground, his neck twisted at an angle that echoed Jacob's. People scattered, shouting. Someone ran for the sheriff. Edmund staggered back, while rising in his throat. Eliza stood over the body, her hand withdrawing slowly, as if releasing something that had been straining to leap free. I did not move, she said quietly. He did. Edmund stared at her, horror and a terrible understanding colliding in his chest. What are you? She looked at him then with something like weariness. I am what you made necessary. Sirens did not exist then, but chaos did. By the time a deputy arrived, the story had already fractured into versions too confused to challenge. The dead man was carried away. Eliza stood untouched. No one would swear she had done anything at all. Edmund fled Natchez before sunset. The ride back was frantic, reckless. He drove the mare hard, ignoring the way she balked and rolled her eyes white whenever Eliza shifted in the seat behind him. Thunderheads gathered again, low and bruised. By the time Harlan Plantation came into view, darkness had fallen. Edmund did not stop at the house. He drove straight for the old sugar shed near the tree line, a place long abandoned, its doors warped, its interior thick with dust and memories. He dragged Eliza down from the wagon, his hands shaking, rage and fear finally indistinguishable. You end tonight, he said hoarsely. She did not resist as he shoved her inside and slammed the door, driving the iron bar home. The sound rang sharp and final in the damp air. Edmund leaned against the wall, chest heaving, laughing weakly. I have you now. From inside the shed, Eliza's voice came soft and steady. You have locked yourself in with everything you owe. Edmund backed away, the laughter dying in his throat. Behind him, the plantation stirred. Lights flared in the main house. Doors banged open. From the cabins, people emerged, drawn by a pressure they did not name. The air thickened, charged. The ground beneath Edmund's feet seemed to tremble. From the shed came a sound like wood splitting, slow and deliberate. The iron bar bowed outward. Edmund turned and ran. By the time he reached the yard, the house had begun to scream, timbers groaning, windows shattering, the past finally refusing to stay buried. Ann Eliza May, stepping free of the shed as if it had never held her at all, knew the confrontation Edmund feared had only just begun. Edmund Harlan bolted across the yard with the sick certainty that the land itself had decided he no longer belonged on it. Rain began again in scattered drops, warm at first, then colder as wind rose from the river. Lanterns swung on hooks and threw wild shadows across the mud. The main house groaned, a deep, living sound, like a beast shifting in its sleep after years of pretending to be tame. He reached the veranda steps and nearly fell climbing them. His hand fumbled at the door latch, fingers slick with sweat and rain. The door opened before he touched it. That was when he understood he was not the one opening doors anymore. Inside, the hallway was darker than it should have been. Lamps flickered, their flames bowing as if breathing. The air smelled of damp plaster and something sharp, like old perfume spilled onto wood and left to sour. Eliza, Edmund called without meaning to, and hated himself for using her name like a plea. No answer came from below. But from above, a floorboard creaked slowly, deliberately, as if someone had shifted their weight to be heard. Edmund drew his pistol and backed into the center of the foyer, eyes fixed on the staircase. Show yourself. Another creak. A soft scrape like fabric against banister rail. His throat tightened. Margaret, he said again, and the name came out thin, almost childish. From the upper landing, a voice, female, low, familiar, drifted down through the darkness. You kept my door locked. Edmund's stomach turned. The voice sounded like Margaret, and yet it did not. It carried an edge and echo as though more than one throat spoke through the same memory. He swallowed hard. You are dead. Pause. Then, so are a great many people on your land. Edmund's grip tightened until his knuckles ached. This is madness. The house creaked again, not as settling wood but as deliberate motion. Somewhere upstairs, a wardrobe door slammed shut. A picture frame crashed to the floor. Then from the back corridor, another sound, soft footsteps, steady and unhurried. Eliza May appeared at the end of the hall, her dress damp from the rain, her hair still neatly coiled. She looked as if she had simply stepped from one room to another, not escaped a locked shed as iron bowed and would split. You brought it to the edge, she said. Edmund aimed the pistol at her. You did this. Eliza's gaze moved to the weapon, then back to his face. I did not build this place. You are killing men. Eliza's expression did not change. Men die here every day, sir. You only notice when it inconveniences you. The word struck like a slap. Edmund's mouth twisted. I will put you down like a rabid animal. Eliza took one slow step forward. You cannot shoot a dead. Behind Edmund, the staircase groaned. He felt it, felt the air press and shift, as if someone moved just out of sight on the landing. He did not turn. He could not. You will leave, he snapped at Eliza, voice cracking with rage. Walk out that door and never return. Eliza's eyes flicked toward the front entrance. The latch clicked softly as if the house were considering the command and rejecting it. You are not the one giving orders tonight, she said. Edmund's breath hitched. Then who is? For a moment, Eliza said nothing. The silence swelled, thick and heavy, until it felt like standing under water. Then she spoke, and her voice seemed to carry more than one meaning at once. Everyone you thought did not count. A sudden crash exploded upstairs. Edmund flinched. Dust sifted from the ceiling. The chandelier in the foyer swayed, its crystals chiming like nervous teeth. From the upper landing, a figure stepped into view. It was not Margaret, not fully. It wore the outline of her, the pale shape of a woman in a nightdress, but its face shifted between shadows, features never settling long enough to be known. Edmund felt his knees weaken. You locked me away, the figure whispered. Edmund raised the pistol toward the landing, hands shaking violently now. Stay back. The figure tilted its head. You never stayed back. Edmund fired. The shot cracked through the house and tore into the banister, splintering wood. The figure did not fall. It did not even flinch. Instead, the sound of the gunshot seemed to wake something in the walls. Doors banged open. Windows rattled. A deep groan rolled up from the foundation, as if the entire structure had drawn breath. Eliza moved fast, faster than she ever had, crossing the hallway and reaching Edmund before he could fire again. She grabbed his wrist and forced the pistol downward. Do not, she said sharply. You will only feed it. Edmund wrenched free, wild-eyed. Get away from me. He stumbled backward into the study, slamming the door behind him, throwing the iron bolt across it like a man barricading himself from a flood. He pressed his back to the wood, gasping, listening. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but rain and his own ragged breath. Then came the footsteps. Not upstairs. Not in the hall. Inside the study. A soft, measured tread crossing the rug. Edmund's blood turned to ice. He swung around, pistol raised, and saw his own desk chair slowly turning as if someone had just stood from it. The lamp flame dipped low, nearly extinguishing itself, then rose again with a weak shiver. A voice came from the corner where shadows gathered thickest. You thought you could lock it all away. Edmund backed toward the bookshelf, his shoulder striking it hard enough to rattle the spines. Who are you? The voice answered, and it was not one voice now. It was many, layered like a choir of the drowned. We are the ones you never counted. The study door began to rattle violently, not from outside forcing entry, but as if the house itself were shaking it loose. The bolt bent with a metallic whine. Edmund lifted the pistol with both hands, sobbing through his teeth without realizing it. No, no. The bolt snapped. The door burst inward. Eliza May stood framed in the doorway, rain lit behind her like a grim halo, and beyond her the hallway seemed longer than it should have been, darker, filled with moving shadows. Come out, she said. Face what you built. Edmund shook his head, eyes glossy with terror and rage. You want my confession. Eliza's gaze hardened. I want your understanding. Outside, lightning split the sky, and the plantation answered with a sound like cracking bone. The final night had arrived, whether Edmund agreed to it or not. Edmund Harlan did not remember crossing the hallway. Later, when the surviving hands whispered about that night in fragments and half-prayers, Some swore they saw him stumble out like a man pulled by invisible rope. Others insisted Eliza may never touched him at all, that he followed her voice the way a drowning man follows the sound of shore. Edmund himself could only recall the sensation of the house breathing around him, the air thick as syrup, the lantern light bending as if frightened. He emerged into the foyer with the pistol still raised, his hands trembling so hard the barrel wavered like a compass needle losing north. The chandelier swayed overhead. Rainwater leaked through the ceiling in slow drops, each one striking the floor with a soft, maddening patience. Eliza stood a few steps ahead of him, facing the staircase, her posture steady, almost formal, as though she were attending a service in a church built from sin. "Speak," Edmund rasped, not sure who he was addressing. "If you want something, speak." From the upper landing, that shifting female silhouette hovered at the edge of the darkness, its outline flickering between Margaret's familiar shape and something older, harder, unrecognizable. It did not descend. It did not need to. Its presence filled the house the way smoke fills a room. "You bought a body," the voice said, layered with others beneath it, "and thought you bought a soul." Edmund's throat constricted. I did what men do." A low sound moved through the walls, half laughter, half groan. Floorboards creaked as if 100 unseen feet shifted at once. "What men do," the voice repeated, tasting the words. "Yes, that is the sickness." Edmund's eyes darted toward the front door. He could run. He could flee into the rain, into the mud, into the open air where walls could not whisper. He took one step, and the door slammed shut on its own with such force the frame shuddered. He froze. Eliza did not turn to look at him. She simply said almost gently, "You cannot outrun a house built on stolen breath." Rage flared, bright and desperate. Edmund lifted the pistol toward Eliza's back. For a heartbeat the world narrowed, just the black circle of the barrel, just the idea of ending the thing that had undone him. But the house moved first. A gust of wind tore through the foyer though no window was open. The pistol jerked upward in Edmund's hands as if yanked. The shot cracked into the ceiling. Plaster exploded and rained down like pale snow. The chandelier's chain snapped with a metallic scream. The chandelier fell. Glass and iron shattered across the floor in a violent bloom. Edmund threw his arms up too late. A shard sliced his forearm. Blood ran warm down his wrist. Eliza turned then finally and looked at him. Not with triumph. With a tired, ancient certainty. "It will not let you," she said. "It is not it," Edmund hissed, clutching his bleeding arm. "It is you. You've poisoned my land. You've—" A sound rose from outside, voices, shouting, frantic footsteps in mud. The enslaved people had gathered in the yard, drawn by the house's screaming and the gunfire. Some held lanterns. Some held nothing but their fear. Old Ruth stood among them, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the windows as if watching an execution. Edmund surged toward the nearest window and flung the shutter open. "Help!" he shouted into the rain. "Get in here. Stop this." No one moved. Not a single person stepped forward. Their faces stared up at him, dozens of eyes reflecting lantern light, hollowed by years of obedience. Edmund expected hatred. He expected delight. What he saw was something worse. Indifference. As if his terror did not matter. As if he had become just another noise the plantation produced. Old Ruth lifted her chin. Her voice carried through the rain, clear as a bell. "Now you hear it," she called. "Now you feel it." Edmund's mouth opened, but no words came. Behind him, the upstairs silhouette shifted closer to the top stair. The air grew colder. The house seemed to tighten like a fist. Then the smell arrived, sharp, sudden, unmistakable. Smoke. Edmund spun toward the corridor and saw it seeping from beneath the study door, gray and thick, curling along the floorboards as if searching. A moment later, orange light flickered behind the cracks of wood. "No," Edmund whispered. He lunged for the study, grabbed the knob, yanked. Heat blasted his face like an open oven. Fire rolled out, hungry and loud, devouring shelves, curtains, paper. Ledgers curled black. Ink ran like blood. The very records Edmund had worshipped turned to ash in seconds. Eliza stepped back, calm even as the house ignited. "It always ends with fire," she said, as if recalling a familiar season. Edmund staggered, coughing, eyes watering. "My house, my—" "Not yours," Eliza corrected softly. The fire spread with impossible speed, climbing walls as if guided. Flames leapt from room to room without waiting for air, as though the house had been soaked in memory and memory burned best of all. Upstairs, glass shattered outward. Curtains caught and flared like flags. The staircase groaned, then buckled. Edmund stumbled into the foyer again, trapped between smoke and the sealed front door. He beat on it with his fists until his knuckles split. "Open," he screamed. "Open, damn you." The door did not move. From somewhere deep within the burning structure, the layered voices rose once more, quiet now, almost tender. "You kept them locked," they said. "Now you will stay." Eliza stood a few steps away, her face lit by firelight, eyes reflecting flames like dark mirrors. For the first time, something like sorrow flickered across her expression. "You could have made different choices," she said. Edmund turned on her, sobbing with rage. "Choices? You speak to me of choices?" Eliza's gaze held his, steady and merciless. "Yes, that is the punishment. You finally understand you had them." A beam cracked overhead. The ceiling sagged, showering sparks. Edmund coughed until his chest burned. Outside, the gathered hands began backing away as the heat intensified, the night turning bright as day. Then, with a sound like the earth breaking open, the front windows exploded outward. The pressure released. The door shuddered, finally giving an inch, just enough. Edmund surged forward, half falling through, stumbling onto the veranda as flames chased him like living things. He hit the boards hard, rolling into rainwater, gasping like a fish thrown onto shore. He looked back, wild-eyed, drenched, shaking. The main house was a torch. In the doorway, framed by fire, Eliza May stood still. She did not step out. For a heartbeat, Edmund believed she would burn with it. Property destroyed, nuisance ended, story clean. But the next moment she was simply gone. No scream. No silhouette. No final sound. Only fire roaring through the bones of Harlan Plantation, and the enslaved people watching in silence as the master's world collapsed into light. By dawn, Edmund would be alive, barely. And the story Natchez would tell about what happened would be carefully chosen, neatly folded, and agreed upon by every white man who needed the truth to stay buried. By morning, Harlan Plantation was nothing but a blackened skeleton. Smoke rose in thin, exhausted columns from the ruins, carrying the bitter scent of burned wood, scorched paper, and something harder to name, a smell like old grief finally exposed to air. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the ground slick and shining, as if the land itself were trying to wash its hands. Edmund Harlan survived. That fact alone unsettled people. They found him near the veranda, half-conscious, his clothes burned through, his hands blistered and bleeding. His hair had singed white at the temples. His eyes stared too wide, darting at every sound, every shifting shadow. When they lifted him, he screamed, not in pain but in terror, and begged them not to take him back inside. "There are voices," he kept repeating. "They are still there." No one answered him. The official story formed quickly, as such stories always did. A lamp overturned. A storm worsened it. Old wiring. Dry beams. Tragedy. Natchez accepted the explanation with relief bordering on gratitude. Insurance papers were filed. Records quietly rewritten. Edmund Harlan was moved to a smaller property upriver, one with fewer rooms and no long hallways. He never remarried. He never rebuilt. People noticed he began sleeping with the lights on. He paid extra for doors with heavier locks. He dismissed servants for standing too quietly behind him. Within 2 years, his hair had gone fully white. Within 5, he barely spoke. When he did, his words slipped sideways, answering questions no one had asked. Once, drunk and shaking, he grabbed a man's sleeve in a tavern and whispered, "She wasn't the curse. She was the ledger." The man laughed and pulled away. Edmund died alone in 1851, found seated upright in a chair, his eyes open, his face twisted in an expression witnesses later struggled to describe. Fear, yes, but also recognition. As if, at the very end, something had finally arrived to collect what was owed. No one claimed his body. As for Eliza May, there were no records. No death notice. No sale papers. No runaway advertisements. She simply vanished from the written world. But stories traveled where documents did not. Former slaves whispered of a woman seen walking away from the ruins before dawn, untouched by fire or rain. Others claimed she moved through river towns for years afterward, appearing wherever cruelty grew careless. Some said disasters followed her. Others said relief did. Old Ruth lived long enough to see emancipation. On her deathbed, she told a child who sat at her feet, "Don't let them tell you she was magic. That's how they hide what they did." "What was she then?" the child asked. Old Ruth smiled, thin and knowing. She was memory that learned how to walk. Today, the land where Harlan Plantation stood is quiet. No house was ever rebuilt there. Crops failed more often than they should have. Animals refused to graze in certain patches. Local children dared one another to walk the tree line at dusk, and none stayed long. Historians argue over the records. Skeptics dismiss the oral accounts. The fire is blamed on weather and chance. But sometimes, late at night, when the cicadas fall silent and the air grows heavy, people nearby swear they hear footsteps where no road remains. Measured, unhurried, certain. As if the land is still remembering. As if some debts, once called in, never truly close. What do you think Eliza May truly was? A curse, a survivor, or the reckoning history refuses to name? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dark historical mystery and want more stories that blur the line between documented truth and buried horror, subscribe to Chronicles of Shadows. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. These stories were buried on purpose. These voices were silenced for a reason. And remembering them is the only way the debt stays paid. See you in the next story.